Hi, welcome to the small shed. Today, 2 years down the line, I'm taking a look at my TWX7 Workstation. See you in a minute. Now, I've had this workstation in the shed since it was built, and I thought it was about time I ran over it and showed everybody what it did, its good points and its bad points. It's not a review as such because for a number of reasons I'm not a great fan of reviews, and indeed I've got a video in the making that's 10 reasons why you shouldn't take any notice of reviews. So it's more just a series of observations on how I've found it over the years, the bits that annoy me and the bits that don't. It's always difficult with something like this because it's a bit like a relationship. You start off and everything's brilliant, and a couple of years down the line all the things that are very good about it you tend to take for granted, but you also pick up all the little niggly bits that you don't really like. So it may be that it appears harsh or unduly critical in places. That doesn't alter the fact that I still, as you'll see at the end, would say, yeah, I'd buy it again tomorrow. So bear that in mind when we're looking at it. It's going to take a while to do. It'll be probably 2 weeks we look at this. The basic unit itself and the saw module I'll look at this week, and then next time we'll look at the router table, which is probably, as far as I'm concerned, the whole highlight of the whole affair. So let's go and have a look at it. So let's make a start with the basic table itself. The TWX7 comes with an insert which has just got dog holes in it. It's got a knee on-off switch for the power tools so that you can kill them just with a bump of the knee. It's got fold-up legs, metal legs. It's got a pair of wheels on the back. They do sell a kit for what they call rugged use, which is a handle and bigger wheels. I'm not quite sure I can see what that's for, because when we get into this you'll see that it's probably not a machine that I can see being used by tradesmen on site or anything where you'd need that. The only thing I can think of where you would need to put the wheels on and use it is if perhaps you were doing house refurbishments or something like that. The centre part unlocks with a pair of catches, and that just basically lifts out. That is a load of levelling screws on the back, some little cotton reel type shapes that locate in there. All of these things mean that you can level and lock it in perfectly with the top of the main table. All of those parts are available and they're all pretty cheap. I've already bought all the levelling screws, the locks, the little inserts that go into there and everything. They are cheap as chips. If you break anything on the table itself, mostly, and I'll come back to that and qualify it later, mostly again it's cheap. If you break a corner piece, which is a plastic cover, it's £3. Even if you break one of the big metal leg supports at the corner, I think they're about £25. So it's not a massively expensive thing if you damage it. It's certainly more rigid. As a table, that is far more rigid than my MW1000 workbench, and that's with a £50 kit from Festool to make it stiffer, because the original one's a bit rubbish. At that point I then start to get into the slightly negatives. If I damage the top on that workbench, yes, it cost me a lot of money to get one from Festool, but I can get one aftermarket on eBay for about £35, and inevitably if you're sawing or anything on that you're going to damage it. The main body of this tabletop is an MDF covered, is it rhino board or something, I don't know. It's got like a hard melamine finish on it. But if this thing is going to be used with dogs and clamps and saws, you're going to get damage. Firstly, they're going to damage the saw blade, or you're going to cut holes in the slots anyway. And the real downside is that this unit complete from Screwfix at the moment is about £239, £240, something like that. If I go to Triton for a replacement top, it's £363. So you wouldn't even bother, you'd just go out and buy a new bench. So that's the first qualification. That work top there is vulnerable. I mean, 2 years on, I've got the odd nick in it, but it's not too bad. I'm not giving it heavy use, but really that is not a sustainable sort of top. Now again, I'm sure if you got the bolts out of the corners you could make one out of MDF, but you'd lose your grooves and everything else. So that's the downside of that. As a workbench, yeah, very good, very solid, portable, fine, all good so far. Let's get back now to the Festool MFT3. On the front of that there are brackets that will hold clamps, where you can clamp work down at more or less any angle. This has also got guides on it, and whether it's because of copyright or what, I don't know, but nothing will fit in that that's the same sort of standard clamp leg size. So those grooves are not a lot of use for anything with, if you've already got the kit. You can still use your clamps on the workbench, fine, no problem at all with that. Problems again come when you come to the holes. Now Triton are a little bit, I would say, even disingenuous in their advertising on these, because it says 19 to 20 mil or something on their advertising, and it doesn't really tell you. The truth is these have got 3/4 inch dog holes on. So again, if you've got anything that's Festool type equipment or standard worktop, that ain't going to fit very well for it. It might if you had to got a sanding drum on each hole individually, but that really is not what I would call a decent fit. With use maybe they would come in. It doesn't really matter in as much as I've got material and all the fittings to make individual inserts if I wanted to do anything, and I don't tend to use this with dogs anyway, because I've got the MFT3 workbench. So as a workbench in itself, yeah, it's not bad, but for currently I think Screwfix are doing them, as I say, for 240 quid or thereabouts. It's quite an expensive thing on its own. You're paying 70 odd pounds just for the kill switch arrangement, which if it's for a workbench you're probably not going to use. So that's the base insert. They do what they call a contractor saw, which is a sort of arrangement with a pair of rails along here that you have a sliding, like a small circular saw that will cut laminate flooring and things like that. That's I think about 230, 240 pounds. I haven't got one of those because I don't see the need for it when I'm using track saw. Let's then move on to the circular saw module, which is the next thing that they do. Now the saw module is perfectly good. It's got an aluminium cast top. It's got the availability, you can buy out feed tables for either side and an end extension, I think, that slides on, that will fit on it, but clearly I haven't got room in here for it. The fence is to me a little bit clunky, but that may just be partly because of my circumstances. The guides slide in along these rails that are on the end and then lock in with the locking levers on them. Now the problem I've got is obviously at the back. When I put that in, it's a little bit difficult to get it in without moving the whole machine into somewhere where I can actually get it to fit on. And I could leave this on all the while, but it does cause all sorts of problems if I do, particularly if the fence is still attached. That is perhaps a bit unfair to criticise it for that, because as I say, a lot of that's down to my own circumstances. The fence sits on a pair of adjusters which you then bolt through from underneath to attach them. They clip into there. A little bit plasticky, but then you screw up through. Now again, where it's a little bit odd to me is that the pieces they screw into are essentially loose in there and just wobble about. Now to get those back out again is going to take me probably half an hour. If this thing's permanently set up, it's not the end of the world, because you only have to do it once every now and again. But if every time I move this I've got to start fanning around with that fence and getting these pieces to come out right at the end before I can screw something into them, it's not very good. I would have thought, you know, it's not beyond the wit of man to either make a bolt that goes through from the top into something on here, or have some sort of captive nut that is really, that is just not the best thing I could probably do with these, is to actually take them off, take the end caps out and then just glue them in, because they're just, there's a little bit of movement in them, I think, because when you get the thing on the angle, obviously it gets slightly longer between centres. It's not ideal anyway, that's all I can say, but you can adjust that angle on that fence with the little screw adjusters here to get it vertical. It's not the end of the world, but it's a bit clunky, and again, if I start getting very close with the blade, close to the blade for a small cut, it means I've got lumps of stuff sticking out on that side. That means I've got to start moving the table around in here, and again, it's not the end of the world, it's just not ideal. But that's where I think some of the impracticalities come with when you make something which is meant to do lots of different things. If you had got the room, and by that I mean anything bigger than this, if you've got a small garage or something like that, you might as well get yourself a table saw with a decent cast top on it, and you could then have a fence that would probably fix from the end. It's an accurate enough fence once it's set up, it's just all these little clips to, you know, hold it down are just things which become vulnerable. And again, they're available as spares. I'll have to get one because I've sawn through that one, but I'm not as comfortable with that as I am with some of the table saws I've used. Extraction's good on it. There's a dust port on the bottom that's about 50-60 mil, and there's a hose collector on top. The blade will wind up. I think the maximum cut is about 80 or 90 mil, I think, on it. I have taking the riving knife off is easy, because you only have to undo this plate here, and then it's a thumb turn and the whole assembly comes off if you ever do need to. It's adjustable down to 45 degrees. Again, not ideal, it's not a mechanical adjustment that's easy. It feels a bit cheap and plasticky, but that will adjust. I think what I'm saying is it's good enough for me, but that's where I think this thing is not going to be, why I questioned whether it would be used on site. I don't think, with the plastic bits that there are on the handles and things on it, that it would last 5 minutes if it were in a work environment like that. For a good, you know, adequate tool for a DIYer, great. That's the saw. Now that is currently what is that, £240. The little project saw that I was on about, sorry, that's £160. That's the outlet on the bottom, the dust outlet. It's got an adapter for a small hose, but actually with a big large bore on it, it extracts very well indeed. So that's it. It's 254mm blade, and it's a 2.5mm kerf on it, something like that, 2.4. So that's dealt with the contractor saw and the actual basic table itself. Next week on, I'll have a look at the router module, which is the bit that I think makes the whole thing make sense. Hope it was of interest. Look forward to seeing you next week. We'll see you then. Bye.